All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. It is Tuesday, and you know what that means. Time for diving deeper into classic teachings on spiritual truth and enlightenment, coming to us from the wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins, and continuing our series in this fantastic and incredible book. Now, we started this series all the way in the back on the section that was the bonus material entitled The Most Valuable Qualities for a Spiritual Seeker. And in that bonus chapter, we shared some of the last lectures of David Hawkins that were delivered by him, which focused on the most valuable qualities for a spiritual seeker. And I thought that was a great spot to start because it went through so many good things, like not comparing yourselves to others regarding holiness, merit, goodness, and deservingness, sinlessness, all of this kind of stuff, and then accepting the concept that the fear of God is ignorance, and that God is peace and love and is everywhere and is nothing else. And then realizing the depiction of God as a judge is a delusion and an ego fixation that arises out of guilt. Realizing that God is not a parent, and then avoiding negatively calibrated levels of consciousness, levels below 200, and following the goal to reach unconditional love. Realizing that salvation and enlightenment are somewhat different goals, and many more, ladies and gentlemen. And this brings us to where we are today, chapter 4, obstacles to spiritual growth. What are the things, I would ask, ladies and gentlemen, or what are the things that can get in the way and can be a block in our path to spiritual growth? Well, that makes me think of something Wayne Dyer once said. He said, someone asked him, or he said, someone asked me, what are the blocks to my happiness? What is blocking me? And his answer was very profound and simple. It was the belief that you have blocks. But if it was only that easy, ladies and gentlemen, to remove the belief that we have in our blocks and the obstacles to our spiritual growth. So let us dive in without any further ado. I want to thank you for being here and joining me as we do each and every time. I love and appreciate each and every one of you that spends time here with me and Dr. David Hawkins and all the wonderful authors and poets and mystics and philosophers and sages of the ages, ladies and gentlemen, that we have gone through, studied, and researched on this channel so far. And so hopefully you got yourself a beverage and are comfy. It is bright and shiny here, just getting out of the cold, wintry Thanksgiving weekend we had, which was wonderful. I hope everybody had a wonderful, safe, happy, blessed Thanksgiving or family time, if it was just that. Now, let us dive in to chapter 4, reading for purposes of teaching and commentary from the wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins. Obstacles to spiritual growth. Begins by saying, quote, oftentimes, the harder one tries to pursue a spiritual path, the more they can feel like they are getting nowhere, continually pulled down by the cares of this world or the feeling of desolation and abandonment by the divine. In this important chapter, Dr. Hawkins discusses 3 obstacles to spiritual growth that you can identify them, so that we can identify them, overcome, and avoid them, and get back on the spiritual path. Dr. Hawkins begins by discussing how following false spiritual teachers who promise to unveil unknown spiritual secrets can be one of the greatest obstacles to true spiritual wisdom. And that is the display quote we get above the chapter. And so it looks like there's such subjects as spiritual truth, integrity of the teacher, inner calling and inner genuineness, and much more, ladies and gentlemen. He begins the chapter by saying, quote, there's a great deal of spiritual fiction out there. In fact, the best-selling spiritual books are all fiction. The Da Vinci Code, for example, because there are all kinds of psychics who tell all kinds of stories about the end of the world or the code of God hidden in your genes. which can be, I'll add, very enthralling and exciting and, encompassing. They can, like, it takes you in this fear of the end of the world, or this kind of, trying to find the secret of, you know, codes. Like, I remember the Bible code was a really big thing, and people were looking at, trying to decipher future prophecies and predictions, Nostradamus kind of stuff, to where we're always wanting to figure out when the end of the world is going to be. For some reason, for those of us that have an interest in spirituality, seem to easily be sidetracked. At least myself, I was definitely back when I began this journey. But sometimes that is what leads us into the deeper spiritual study, is when we are looking, because for me, it was the fear of the end of the world, of course. The whole Mayan calendar, 2012, fire, coming over the mountains and everything. Kind of like the film Knowing, if you've seen that one. And that's just a terrible image to hold in your mind. But eventually, this negativity leads you to a decision. You're going to either focus on that constantly, or you are going to begin to focus on what is most important and what you can do in the here and now to feel better about, regardless of what, reality we may face. Now, with that being said, that which is spiritual truth is not invisible, nor is it encoded. It's starkly wide open. There would be no point to hide the secrets. What kind of secrets are you talking about, Dr. David Hawkins? There are no secrets to hide. He continues, spiritual truth is transparent. For that which is veiled, mysterious, and cloaked, you have to pay money. So, mystical secret of the ancients, give me $500. I will whisper the secret of life into your ears. And then you say this mantra at the same time. Om boom, boomy boom. Om boom, boomy boom. You can see the prophet motive, he says. Spiritual truth has nothing to gain by its promulgation. It doesn't even care if you agree with it or not. Anybody can repudiate anything I say, and it's certainly their option. See, we're not trying to tell you here, this is what he's saying, and I'm going to say as well, I'm not trying to tell you here that I have the secret of the universe, or, some ultimate answer. Like, I am just a student and a researcher of spiritual philosophy, what I like to call the wisdom of the ages. But you will see these people and be wary, especially here on YouTube, of those that will say they have the ultimate secret and then trail you on forever. Like, if I ever say the secret of the universe, immediately it's what you think about expands. And that's up to you what you want to do with that. It's not like, oh, you have to continue to, you see where I'm going. And so you don't have to pay anything. He goes, anybody can repudiate anything I say. This is all open for debate, in my words, but in his words, it is certainly their option. He goes, I have no quarrel with it. It's just fine. There are no qualifications. You don't have to be or prove anything. And you don't have to pay anything. You don't have to sign anything, and you don't have to justify. You don't have to prove that you have any right or claim. Spiritual truth is transparent. A true spiritual teacher frees you. Now, this is very, very important. So-called charlatans, or, these spiritual guru types, will try to bind you and trap you so that you have to continually follow them, for you will never really receive the answer. This is why many of the people that I began watching back in the beginning of this journey, I no longer watch. I mean, some of them I will here and there from time to time, But those lessons and understandings that I needed to learn from those certain teachers freed me and gave me that awareness and understanding so that I could continue in my study. And that was what they always said. I'm not here to keep you here. I'm here to teach you this so you can do this for yourself. And then you can go on and hopefully teach others how to do it for themselves. And maybe we can all eventually find a greater level of consciousness for humanity, ladies and gentlemen, or at least a greater level of happiness for ourselves and those around us. Because remember, the reason I'm here is to seek to achieve and maintain happiness through enlightenment, through an increased awareness and understanding, so that through that awareness, we can increase the quality of our moments, which end up being our lives. And so, a spiritual teacher frees you, and a so-called charlatan tries to bind you. They try to own you, control you, and tell you what to do. Spiritual truth, on the other hand, is freely given. It's not provisional to conditions or who believes it or who doesn't believe it. It's whether it's provable or not provable, because what the world considers provable is not provable. This is the paradox we find ourselves in of these subjective viewpoints of all of our separate perspectives. And that was an interesting bit that we read a few weeks ago, talking about becoming the witness and understanding spiritual consciousness and transcending the mind and the linear domains. And so transcending the mind, which is based on cause and effect, and the Newtonian paradigm in science, you have to shift to a different awareness and stop projecting the idea of causality into the world. There is no causality in the world, he says, none whatsoever. All that you perceive and prove and think is so out there is what we actually project onto the world. Within the world, there is no causality, there is sequence. Sequence is not the world either. Sequence means that you perceived it sequentially. Therefore, you project that must be in the world. It's your perception that is doing this. I felt that important to note there. Back to, this idea of it's who believes it or who doesn't believe it, or whether it's provable or not provable, because what the world considered is provable is not provable. It's not aligned with any particular thing. It doesn't have to exist here or there or be a mountaintop, as if we can only have a holy order on top of a mountain at 6,000 feet. And this, you sometimes get this idea that that's what you have to do to reach some kind of spiritual awareness or understanding, is go to the gurus on the mountaintop at 6,000 feet. Now, this takes us into the first section of this chapter, entitled Religionism and the Dangers of the Narcissistic Ego. Very deep, very fascinating. Hope you're getting value, ladies and gentlemen. I always enjoy doing these. Like I say in the past, I would be doing this by myself anyways, but it is so much more fun to be doing it here for you and with you in the chats and the live premieres. So be sure to join us in those live premieres, usually around 2 or 3 p.m.-ish Mountain Time. And it's fun to interact with those of you that join me in the chat. Shout out to A1, Gorilla Press from back in the day. Haven't seen her in a long time. And Bang Chief. Shout out. Salute. Religionism and the dangers of a narcissistic ego. Dr. Hawkins begins by saying, a lot of people think they're religious, and really what they are practicing is religionism. Now, this is a deep concept, and I've thought about this before and have heard many speak about this before, but have not heard the term religionism used to describe it. Normally, it's spirituality versus religion. Let us see where they go. The main problem with religion now is we deify the religion rather than the God. or the spiritual philosophy or understanding. The printed word or the teaching of the teacher now transcends the divinity itself, which you can see is a very misfortunate and a grave misunderstanding, I would say. Very unfortunate situation that many blindly find themselves in, not really even knowing what they're doing. They say, well, I just went to church because that's what my parents did, and now that's what I do. And it feels good to have fellowship. And that, I will say, is the one good thing about many religions, is the coming together of people in, like-minded or in positive and optimistic ways coming together. However, that does not mean that being trapped is a good thing. So, back to the words of Dr. David Hawkins. The printed word of the teaching or of a teacher now transcends divinity itself. You'll find you're not worshiping God. You'll find that people worship the religion rather than the truth or the meaning of the religion. In the name of the religion, you have the Inquisition. Religionism then eventually becomes its own opposite, the antithesis to its original purpose. And this we firmly explored in our series of the Hermetica, going through the lost wisdom of the pharaohs and the history of Hermetics and the Hermetica. And that talked a lot about the destruction of the great city of Alexandria, the great libraries of Alexandria, and how this lost spiritual understanding and this wisdom has been squashed by religionism on purpose. It gave us a very great understanding of that. So if that's something you're interested in, then go check out that series on our channel, The Hermetica, and it's like the first few videos because it's the very beginning of the book. So easy to find there. Easy to find, ladies and gentlemen. Very good stuff too. I almost want to do that over again just because it got me so pumped up, because it just gets you like, dang it, why have they done this to us? However, religionism eventually becomes its own opposite. We know if you add ism, David Hawkins continues, to the end of any area of knowledge, that it automatically drops below integrity on the scale of consciousness. Let me pull that up real quick for us. I think it's good to reference that. So here we go. He said, the minute you add ism to the end of any area of knowledge, it automatically drops to 190. 190, ladies and gentlemen. So let's take a look here just to give you another reference again. Here at the bottom, we have shame. This is kind of like suffering down here, all the way from 20 up to 75 at grief, fear at 100. But if you realize you go from shame to guilt to apathy to grief to fear, you're increasing in energy. There's a lot more energy in fear than there is in shame. There's a lot more energy and desire and anger than there is in fear. So as you go up, you get to getting by. And then you reach courage at 200. This is the tipping point to where we go into the positive levels of consciousness versus the negative levels. However, I would say getting by is probably where most of us are, usually somewhere in this orange to green area. Desire, pride, courage. But the more courage, neutrality, and willingness and acceptance that you have, this is where you begin to align with the Tao, as we talked about in our Tao Te Ching series, or align with the universe, the flow, God. So the moment we add ism, because through this muscle testing, applied kinesiology that David Hawkins and the Institute of Applied Kinesiology has created, you can test these kind of things, even statements and words. And so any moment he says you add an ism to the end of any area of knowledge, then it automatically drops to 190, which is just below courage. It's in a prideful area. I find this one very interesting, how the chakras go in the same pattern. and also the connection to the light spectrum here. Just very fascinating. That could be about 25 podcasts, but it's important to have that for reference every now and then when the scale of consciousness and the levels of consciousness are mentioned. Now it becomes position, positionalized with narcissistic gain when we add this ism. So you have to impose environmentalism rather than just being an environmentalist. I added that last sentence, but it seemed to make sense. You have to impose, David Hawkins continues, liberalism. You have to impose conservatism. The minute it's an ism, militarism or anti-militarism, it becomes a crusade. And everybody wants to get on the bandwagon and get on TV and hold up a place card and so on and so forth. The vanity of the narcissistic ego is unlimited. So what can we do, Dr. David Hawkins? Through education, he continues, you get what the limitations of the ego are, and that gives you a certain degree of humility to begin with. You realize that you're lucky to have any idea of what reality is in the first place, because the ego, our ego, ladies and gentlemen, is so intent on displacing reality with its own perceptions and projecting them onto the world that it's almost impossible to see the reality of this world. For some reason, I was thinking of Ratatouille there, the Disney movie. And it's funny how the judge or the critic character in the film was named Ego, and how Ego was coming to do this. And this is what his job was as a food critic in the film, is that he was so intent on displacing reality with his own perceptions and projecting them through his articles and reviews of these very fancy restaurants, Gusteau's. But it's like his perceptions was projected onto the world that it was almost impossible to see the actual quality or reality of the world from the projections that are given to us by the narcissistic nature of the ego that ends up being broadcast to us through media in whatever form that we consume it. So it's important to remember what you think about expands. So be careful what you focus on. Now, this is very fascinating. It's almost impossible to see the reality of the world because so much is a projection. In the film, how is it possible that a rat could make such an incredible meal? But if you get rid of your perceptions and judgments and your projections onto the world, it is very interesting. The experience that you can have, and in the end, you will find that truly anyone can cook. I did not know we were going to go there, ladies and gentlemen, but the metaphor makes sense here for me. The media, first of all, because so much is a projection, the media, first of all, by what they select, have already prejudiced us. They say, oh, this is important, and that's why it's on the evening news. Things that are profoundly more important are never on the evening news. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean, if you haven't realized this already, then I'm glad you're here with us, and thank you for joining me and being here, seeking after spiritual truth and enlightenment. And so things that are profoundly more important are never on the evening news. Only the trivial is on the evening news, the afternoon news, and every bit of news. The profoundly important would not be of interest to most common people, which a lot of us may be, despite being on this path. However, I would think that if you are here, then we're a little bit above the normies, ladies and gentlemen. However, that would be a subjective viewpoint in my own perception and projection onto the world. So we have to be careful with that. The profoundly important thing would not be of interest to most people. How did the great shakers and makers of this world arrive at their conclusions and then execute them. That would be worth looking at, instead of the latest titillations and silly amusements we see. Wow. I didn't think I would read that sentence, but that is fascinating. While I spend so much time researching the, the 1800s, the 1700s, and the sentence that he just said there, if we could spend time learning and discovering how the greatest, now maybe not in character, the most, uh, the most inhuman and controlling individuals, but on scale of controlling and influencing and changing society, how these great shakers and movers and makers of the new world that we find ourselves in as compared to the old world, ladies and gentlemen, we will be doing more research on that in the future as I continue to do that on my own outside of my videos here on this channel. But see, that is important. How did we end up where we are? And what is our true history? And why were the systems and structures of our society created to be the way they are? And who created them? And for what purpose? And on and on. How did they arrive at their conclusions? And then how did they so brilliantly, despite the not so positive nature, how did they so brilliantly pull this plan over our eyes? How did they pull the wool, so to speak, over our eyes? Well, these are much greater questions to be asking yourself. And like he was saying, only the trivial is on the evening news. The profoundly important things would be of not much interest to most people, because they are more interested rather than how did we end up where we are, and how did the great shakers and makers of this world arrive at their conclusions and execute them. Most people would rather look at the latest titillations or the silliness, the silly amusements that we see on our media, our news. I had no idea this was going to go this way. I never know what to title these videos, ladies and gentlemen. So hopefully you made it here and are enjoying this. But this is so true. It's like, how do great people think? And why do they arrive at the conclusions they arrive at? And how can that be contextualized so that we can understand it and begin to do so ourselves with better motives for humanity going forward in the future? Because if we can't understand those who got us here and how they did it, then it's going to be very hard for us to understand how to get out of it and get us somewhere else. How to understand the world that we see would be far more interesting, but many people are not that interested in looking past appearances. See, the appearances of things can often be an illusion. That is the veil that was mentioned earlier about the spiritual truth is not veiled. It is plain. However, that which is veiled is not integral or a true spiritual reality. That doesn't mean that that which is the truth has been veiled to us by those for a purpose. That would be the antithesis of the spiritual philosophy. I'm getting off track. Let me continue. How to understand the world that we see could be far more interesting, but many people are not interested in looking past appearances. He says, I am always interested in what the essence of a thing is. And hopefully you are too, ladies and gentlemen, because I am. So we are always interested in what the essence of a thing is. I mean, we can easily see what the appearance is, so we can flick on the news and see it for ourselves. But what the essence is of that, is it naivety? Very often it is. Spiritual humility Dr. Hawkins continues, is an attitude I have myself. My mind, in and of itself, is not really capable of discerning the ultimate truth of reality. That's why the great avatars came to reveal to us that which is unknowable. And to be grateful all the time is an attitude of humility. That seems to be the ultimate theme when it comes to any kind of spiritual study, is that like gratitude and gratefulness is like the most powerful thing when it comes to any kind of spiritual act or, spiritual pursuit or journey. Remember, pure philosophy is spiritual striving through a constant contemplation to attain true knowledge of Atum, the one God. Those are the words of Hermes Trismegistus, thrice greatest Hermes, or the Egyptian sage god Thoth, and telling us to understand this truth that for us is impossible to attain entirely. However, to be grateful all the time through a constant contemplation is an attitude of humility. To be grateful that you are interested in spirituality is an ultimate place to, begin. This is what he said earlier in this book, is that, to begin a spiritual pursuit, just realize and be grateful for the fact that you are even interested. For like we just discovered and, talked about, most people are interested in what the Kardashians are doing, or, it's like the latest titillations and silly stories that for some reason people think are more important than the most important things in our lives. However, that is why we are here, because we realize or hope that we are on the path of that which is far more important than the latest titillations and silly headlines. Now, this is very fascinating. You can say this: I'm grateful. I'm even interested in the subject. I'm grateful that I've come across good teachers along the way, and I am grateful for the life experiences that have come about and that have revealed truths to me. One of the mantras I like to use every now and then is when I get in a negative mindset, in a loop, that it is, I am grateful for all that I have and all that I have had and will continue to have, and for all that continues to flow into my life. I am thankful for all that I have and all that will continue to flow into my life. That means both the good and the bad things from our subjective perspective that we are projecting on to the world, or, that we are, it's like our consciousness is a projector that creates our reality, and that's what we experience. So if you put different stuff into the projector, then you will experience different things. Now, when we can have this attitude of gratitude or this gratefulness for even being here, for the life experiences that have come about, that have revealed deep truths to us and spiritual insights. So you must understand, Dr. David Hawkins continues, that humility is a positionality. It's where you stand back and you're sort of saying, I have myself been unable to fully comprehend reality. And I have been I have been judging it based on the appearances rather than the essences and the deeper meanings. I have myself been unable to fully comprehend it. And you're constantly asking for revelation. So your position with God is like a mudra. Your position with God is like a yin, where God would be the yang. I added that. It's when you stand back and you say, Dr. Hawkins continues, to thee, O Atum, O Tao, O Lord, O God, O universe, whatever that is for you, because there are many names, and as we have learned, the name is not the eternal. That is, once again, the appearances and the subjective viewpoints. However, I surrender to thee. I like to use Atum lately doing the Egyptian research. It means the one God, though. I surrender, and I ask for your will in this matter, or in the matter. And when you can surrender, remember, let's go back, ladies and gentlemen, to the scale of consciousness. When you can get above getting by to willingness at 310, a neutrality, a willingness, an allowing, an acceptance at 350, and then reason, you can see immediately you begin to get to the flow. These are expanded levels of consciousness compared to contracted. And so when we can finally stand back and surrender, and then you surrender to what appears to be most aligned with divinity, ladies and gentlemen. And that is profound. That is powerful. Let us continue, and we'll finish this section here, getting to paranormal realms and dimensions for next week. That can always be a fun one. And that one's quite a few pages as we get to spiritual truth and the integrity of the teacher and inner knowing and genuineness. Now, he continues, quote, all negative feelings are linked with each other. You want something because you feel unfulfilled. So if something gets in the way, now you get angry. Now you get frustrated, and you realize that if you get it, now you're going to be prideful. But if you're prideful in your ownership, now you have to fear that somebody will take it away from you or that you won't get it. And then you get puffed up if you do have it. So one thing leads to the next in this, compared to that scale of consciousness that we were looking at. It goes from shame to guilt to apathy to grief to fear to desire to anger to pride, and then up to the allowing or the willingness, the acceptance, the surrender, the release of the attempt to control and push and force rather than using power, which does not exhaust itself of energy, but rather increases as compared to force, which exhausts itself. Now, I just loved how he did that there. He went through how we could do this cycle of how we go through the different levels of consciousness, and we can go up and then up, that took us back down. And it's this constant flowing. And it's our challenge to try to attempt to be in neutrality and willingness and acceptance and reason. And then the higher levels, love, joy, peace, and ultimately pure consciousness or enlightenment. However, so, you're prideful in your ownership, then you have to fear that somebody will take it away or that you won't get it, and then you get puffed up if you do have it. So one thing leads to another. Your anger is that somebody is interfering. Negative feelings are all based on the same delusion. And the delusion is that the source of happiness is something outside of yourself. Yes. A round of applause to Dr. David Hawkins there, because that is what I end each one of these videos by saying, is that there is no way to happiness, ladies and gentlemen, because happiness is the way. It is what we must create within ourselves. And I'll say that again at the end of the video. So be sure to stick around for that. Once again, I love and appreciate each and every one of you for joining me. It means so much that you would spend time with me here on these videos and in the premieres. If you're getting value, share this with somebody who is like-minded. It helps support the work that we do here. So negative feelings are all based on the same delusion. And the delusion is that the source of happiness is something or somewhere outside of ourselves. Like, that is the main thing that I had started this channel to talk about. I used the cat story of the cat, little kitten chasing its tail, trying to get an eternal lock on happiness. But that's not it. because you'll always be chasing it, trying to get a lock on it. And even then, when you've got a hold on it, you can't go anywhere but walk in circles. But then the other, is you cannot give it away if you don't have it inside of you. So before, you have to create this ability through effort and practice, and spiritual work seems to be the easiest way for most of us on this journey, but to have it within yourself, because if you do not have it within yourself, you'll go somewhere else looking for it. Oh, I need to get another drink or whatever. I mean, water's a bad example of that, but you'll be fixating on and attaching to these things outside of yourself. And when you do not have those things, whether it be anything, people, substances, then you won't have it and you will be without it. And that is the trap. That is the delusion. So when we can begin to understand that the source of happiness is not something outside of ourselves, but that we have to create it within ourselves through this ability, through this greater awareness and understanding of the nature of reality. He says, when I get that title, when I get that car, when I get that job, oh, when I get that income, or I have this much money, or when I get that, there's always a get. When I get that relationship, when I get that recognition, when I get on that TV program, or when I finally graduate high school and get my first car, like there's always a delaying of our happiness. And it's like Wayne Dyer was he was a therapist or psychologist, and he had a practice, and there was a mother that would come to him just talking about her son who was in school, just elementary school, but the teachers had this complaint, and they were like, little Billy or little Susie, whoever it was, if it was a son, it would be Billy. So little Billy seems to have this problem where he can't postpone his gratification. So he's just, before they even finish the work and he has a complete picture, he's just too into celebrating halfway through that he can't complete the picture. And Wayne Dyer, being a therapist and a psychiatrist, said, well, it's the teacher that's wrong here. This is something that we should all strive to do for ourselves, is this ability to not continually be postponing our gratification. He tells the story of he was in military, and for, the entire 2 or 3 years or whatever, he was crossing off the days. And then he got to the last month or so, and he goes, man, I'm so excited. This is going to be it. I'm finally going to get there, and I'm going to have this gratification, this happiness, this joy, this ultimate. This is what's called striving, the psychology of striving rather than arriving, and being here and allowing and accepting, being in the willingness, the neutrality, the reason, the joy, the love. But when we're striving and pushing, we are never there. And actually, what we are doing in that process is practicing not being there. So when we get there, when he finally crossed off the last day, and they're like, all right, you're good, great job, congratulations, you're good to go. And he walked out the gates. He said there was no bands, there was no parade, there wasn't even anybody. He goes, it was just me. And he goes, I drove off, and it was the biggest letdown. It's like you live your whole life, oh, when I finally get that job, or when I finally graduate, or get that house, or that's kind of where I am, as you can see based on my background. Like, when I finally get that extra area of storage to put more things with, then I'll feel the ultimate completion and happiness. That's a delusion, and I know that, but it's hard to remind ourselves that we need to be here now and learn how to arrive and practice arriving rather than practice striving. Because if we practice striving, when we do get there and there are no bands and things, we won't even be happy by our accomplishment. We'll be disappointed that there is no great celebration, because all we know how to do is continue striving. So we'll say, okay, what's the next thing, since this didn't give me that feeling? And it's a never-ending cycle. And you could see how people could live their entire lives striving rather than arriving. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to end it there because that was a great little ramble. And I didn't know it was going to go there, but that's how we end all of these videos. And so let's finish this little paragraph here, and then we will sum it up for today, ladies and gentlemen. It's about 1:30 here, so I got to do some uploading and get this premierable for us in the next hour or so. But it's this idea, when I get that title, when I get that car, when I get that recognition, it's always this when I get. It's always getting this. If anything stands in our way to our spiritual growth, if anything stands in our way, he says, and anything stands in your way and my way, ladies and gentlemen, to getting this, now you have to hate it, and you're angry at it, and you want to destroy it. When you see that one thing leads to another, then you don't achieve it. You feel guilt and self-blame, and you feel worthless, and now you feel depressed. This is the problem with striving. This is like when you get there and there's no bands and celebration and a parade. You begin to feel all these negative feelings. You feel self-repudiation, self-blame, depressed. All the negative feelings based on the assumption that what you need is outside of yourself somewhere. But the most powerful, profound, life-changing spiritual revelation and understanding is that you are whole and complete in each moment and need not chase after anything in order to feel and be complete. That doesn't mean that it doesn't take great work and effort and diligence and practice and a lifestyle, a discipline. Being a disciple, you could say, of creating and maintaining happiness within yourself through enlightenment, through a greater awareness and understanding of the nature of reality. I mean, I keep getting to these points, which would be a perfect ending, but I got to finish this paragraph because that'll lead us up to the next section for next week entitled Paranormal Realms and Dimensions. Now, all the negative feelings based on the assumption that what you need is outside of yourself. So you see yourself as incomplete when, like I just said, you are whole and complete in each moment and need not chase after anything in order to feel that. You know, this idea of once I'm famous, once I'm educated, once I'm older, once I'm richer, once I'm blah, 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 then I'll finally be happy. No matter what you say, it always puts fulfillment off into the future. So you're always coming from incomplete to incomplete because you're incomplete. But then when you get what you want, there's always one better. This is striving rather than arriving. I knew many super rich people back east, he says, and they always had the saying, no matter how big your yacht is, a bigger one will always dock next to you. It's an endless race, ladies and gentlemen. And it was very comical to see it. And of course, people who are really quite wealthy have been for some time, live very simple lives, save for public events and parties. He says, I knew lots of multimillionaires, and very often they would inherit a big estate, 40 acres with a huge castle. Inherit a huge castle? Anyways, sorry, that's a different subject. You know, the 40 acres, huge castle and a house and all of these buildings. It makes you wonder where they came from and when they were really built and how all of that makes any sense. But that once again, different podcast. He says, and when I went to visit them, they actually lived in one of the servants' houses. There's a little house out there, and that's where they live. The richest people in America. I used to live next door to one, he says. And he had a third story on his house. And I said, what's up there? He said, I don't know. So that makes me even wonder even more about these old world structures and buildings, you know, the Roman themed with the colonnades and all of that. It's like, I wonder how many people inherited these buildings from the reset from the previous old world to the new world now. That's what we called it. when we came here and said nothing was here. Oh, it's just a bunch of land. Manifest destiny. It's like, I don't know about that. Anyways, different topic. They don't even know what's in the third story of these houses. I mean, this is just a funny example, but because I don't know, I've never been up there. They would usually stay put in 2 or 3 rooms in this giant house. It's like a miniature castle, the family estate. And there'd be a kitchen, a sitting room, and a bedroom, and that's where they lived 99% of the time, except when their great niece was there having a birthday party, and then they would have a party on the lawn. But they lived all the time just in the little corner of the house. What are you going to do with the 3rd floor with 5,000 feet of magnificent furniture? Can you imagine the artwork, the woodwork, the marble, and just some of these old world structures were so beautiful and amazing. It's incredible. However, with a wonderful view, I mean, once you've looked out the window and seen the beautiful view, now what are you going to do? Go back downstairs to the kitchen and watch the TV? Put up your feet and put some wood on the stove? The same as the servants did or do? It's comical. It's comical, ladies and gentlemen. That's so weird. I had no idea he was going to end with that sentiment. But the main idea here is that all the negative feelings that we have are based on the assumption that what we need is outside of ourselves somewhere. And we see ourselves as incomplete. And we tell ourselves, oh, once I'm famous, once I'm educated, once I'm older, once I'm richer, once I'm that kind of guy or that kind of woman, then I'll be happy. But as I say every time, ladies and gentlemen, that was a boom to wisdom and a boom to knowledge, a boom to spiritual truth and enlightenment from the wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins. But remember to seek to achieve and maintain happiness through enlightenment, through a greater awareness and understanding of the nature of reality, so that through that awareness, we can increase the quality of our lives and the lives of those around us. And remember to continue to seek to discover the lost mysteries of our history and the wisdom of the ages, ladies and gentlemen. And also remember, as we just learned today, in such a wonderfully put way from Dr. David Hawkins, is that there is no way to happiness, because happiness is the way, ladies and gentlemen. And when we can begin to get there and realize that and bring happiness to life, rather than trying to extract it out, we bring it to life, then all of those things, like we just read about, the house, or all of these things we've been telling ourselves, when I finally get there, then I'll be happy, becomes irrelevant, because then we have arrived, and then we are there, and then hopefully the entire journey is wonderful. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I love and appreciate each and every one of you that spends time here with me on these videos and in the premieres, that spends time with me and Dr. David Hawkins and all the wonderful authors and poets and mystics and philosophers and sages of the ages. Ladies and gentlemen, I really do appreciate it. And give yourself a pat on the back for being part of the few that are here, seeking after truth and seeking after the mysteries of our history and the secrets of reality. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this was a wonderful one. I almost want to highlight that little bit there, that section. And it's all about negative feelings and how our happiness is something that we are postponing. And I hope my little rants in between helped add on to that, because it's been my main study for many years now, studying Dr. David Hawkins, and more influentially on my life, Dr. Wayne W. Dyer and his wonderful teachings on psychology and this spiritual philosophy. Be sure to expand the description, ladies and gentlemen. I have the book linked there for you. The description, if you aren't aware, is right underneath the video. There'll be like a little sentence, and right next to that, it will say more. And you can hit that more, and it will expand. And down in there, video description box, as some call it. But you will find a link to the book so you can get it for yourself, to put it on your shelf so you can follow along in the future or for reference if you need, because this is profound spiritual philosophy that can help all of us at any point in our lives. And it's good to just kind of go over it, even if you're not in the mood, because it helps set the tone, so to speak. Also, check out the link to my Etsy shop for my landscape paintings, and also a link to C60 Purple Power, the most powerful antioxidant known to man. Give yourself the gift of health, ladies and gentlemen. And until next time, be the change that you want to see. Be the example you want to set. We'll see you actually tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. Where are we going in the Corpus Hermeticum tomorrow? It will be The Mind to Hermes, Corpus Hermeticum, Chapter 10. Ooh, it's a long one, 141 verses. So that'll be a two-parter. Should be fun, ladies and gentlemen. Till tomorrow, be the change you want to see. Be the example you want to set. No, 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 no.